And I am back. I have another story to share with you, also from two writers from the Associated Press, Kara Anna and Inna Varanitsia. And they're writing about Russia's seizure of the Chernobyl nuclear plant. And they see what the Russians did as a nightmare. This is what they wrote. Here in the dirt of one of the world's most radioactive places, Russian soldiers dug trenches. Ukrainian officials worry they were, in effect, digging their own graves. Thousands of tanks and troops rumbled into the forested Chernobyl exclusion zone in the earliest hours of Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February, churning up highly contaminated soil from the site of the 1986 accident that was the world's worst nuclear disaster. For more than a month, some Russian soldiers bunked in the earth within sight of the massive structure built to contain radiation from the damaged Chernobyl nuclear reactor. A close inspection of their trenches was impossible because even walking on the dirt is discouraged. As the 36th anniversary of the April 26, 1986 disaster approaches and Russia's invasion continues, it's clear that Chernobyl, a relic of the Cold War, was never prepared for this. With scientists and others watching in disbelief from afar, Russian forces flew over the long-closed plant, ignoring the restricted airspace around it. They held personnel still working at the plant at gunpoint during a marathon shift of more than a month, with employees sleeping on tabletops and eating just twice a day. Even now, weeks after the Russians left, the plant's main security engineer, Valery Semenov, said, "I need to calm down." He worked 35 days straight, sleeping only 3 hours a night, rationing cigarettes and staying on even after the Russians allowed a shift change. "I was afraid they would install something and damage the system," he said in an interview. Workers kept the Russians from the most dangerous areas, but in what Semenov called the worst situation he has seen in his 30 years at Chernobyl, the plant was without electricity, relying on diesel generators to support the critical work of circulating water for cooling the spent fuel rods. The deputy head of the state agency managing the exclusion zone, Maxim Shvenchuk, said it was very dangerous to act in this way. He was scared by it all. Russia's invasion marks the first time that occupying a nuclear plant was part of a nation's war strategy, said Rebecca Harms, former president of the Greens group in the European Parliament, who has visited Chernobyl several times. She calls it a nightmare scenario in which every nuclear plant can be used like a pre-installed nuclear bomb. A visit to the exclusion zone, more desolate than usual, found that the invasion risked a catastrophe worse than the original explosion and fire at Chernobyl that sent radioactive material into the atmosphere and became a symbol of the Soviet Union's stumbling final years. Billions of dollars were spent by the international community, including Russia, to stabilize and secure the area. Now, authorities are working with Ukraine's deputy ministry on ways to protect Chernobyl's most critical places. At the top of the list are anti-drone systems and anti-tank barriers, along with a system to protect against warplanes and helicopters. None of this will matter much if Russian President Vladimir Putin resorts to nuclear weapons, which Shevchuk says he can't rule out anymore. He says, quote, "I understand they can use any kind of weapon, and they can do any awful thing." Ms. Harms said Chernobyl needs special international protection with a robust UN mandate. As with the original disaster, the risks are not only to Ukraine, but to nearby Belarus and beyond, she says it depends from where the wind blows. After watching thousands of Soviet soldiers work to contain the effects of the 1986 accident, sometimes with no protection, Harms and others were shocked at the Russian soldiers' disregard for safety or their ignorance in the recent invasion. Some soldiers even stole highly radioactive materials as souvenirs or possibly to sell. Shevchuk said, I think from movies they had the imagination that all dangerous small things are very valuable. He believes hundreds of thousands of soldiers damaged their health, likely with little idea of the consequences, despite plant workers' warnings to their commanders. Shevchuk said most of the soldiers were around 20 years old. All these actions proves that their management, and in Russia in general, human life equals like zero. The full extent of Russia's activities in the Chernobyl exclusion zone is still unknown, especially because the troops scattered mines that the Ukrainian military is still searching for. Some have detonated, further disturbing the radioactive ground. The Russians also set several forest fires, which have been put out. Ukrainian authorities can't monitor radiation levels across the zone because Russian soldiers stole the main server for the system, severing the connections on March 2nd. The International Atomic Energy Agency said Saturday it still wasn't receiving remote data from its monitoring systems. The Russians even took Chernobyl staffers' personal radiation monitors. In the communications center, one of the buildings in the exclusion zone, not overgrown yet by nature, the Russians looted and left a carpet of shattered glass. The building felt deeply of the 1980s, with a map on a wall still showing the Soviet Union. Someone at some point had taken a pink marker and traced Ukraine's border. In normal times, about 6,000 people work in this exclusion zone, about half of them at the nuclear plant. When the Russians invaded, most workers were told to evacuate immediately. Now about 100 are left at the nuclear plant, and 100 are elsewhere. Semenov, the security engineer, recalled the Russians checking the remaining workers for what they called radicals. We said, look at our documents. 90% of us are originally from Russia. But we're patriots of our country, he said, meaning Ukraine. When the Russians hurriedly departed March 31st as part of withdrawal from the region that left behind scorched tanks and traumatized communities, they took more than 150 Ukrainian National Guard members into Belarus. Shevchuk fears they're now in Russia. In their rush, the Russians gave nuclear plant managers a choice. Sign a document saying the soldiers had protected the site and there were no complaints, or be taken into Belarus. The managers signed. One protective measure the Russians did appear to take was leaving open a line routing communications from the nuclear plant through the workers' town of Slabuchik and onto authorities in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. It was used several times, Shevchuk said. He added, quote, I think they understood it should be for their safety. The IAEA said Tuesday the plant is now able to contact Ukraine's nuclear regulator directly. Another Ukrainian nuclear plant, the Zaporizhia plant in southeast Ukraine, remains under Russian control. It is the largest in Europe. Shevchuk, like other Ukrainians, has had it with Putin. He said, we're inviting him inside the new safe containment shelter. Then we will close it. One more piece of first-person accounting of what's happening in Ukraine. I know there have been a lot of arguments about, or I should say discussion, about the coverage that's being provided by various television organizations in the West about the situation in Ukraine. Some, including myself, have referred to some of this as war porn. I mean, why do we watch this stuff? But on the other hand, why do we not watch it? Why is it not in front of us every single minute? This is what it looks like. This is what this kind of invasion and slaughter and war looks like. In fact, it's what every kind of conflict like this one looks like. It doesn't matter where it's happening. The West Bank, Southeast Asia, Central America, Middle Europe, it doesn't matter. This is what it looks like. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. As you know, we've switched formats and are now broadcast exclusively on the Progressive Voices Network. So that means you get fewer program interruptions, no corporate commercials, and lots of profanity. But our format change also means some of our radio listeners no longer hear the program. It's been a while since I mentioned our podcasts, so you may have forgotten that there is a way to listen to this program anytime you need a good dose of screaming. Visit MikeMalloy.com and subscribe to our podcasts. As a podcast subscriber, you can download the program to your mobile device and take me with you wherever you go. And if you have a friend who needs a dose of truth-seeking, you can give a gift subscription as well. That's MikeMalloy.com, and never miss a minute of the uncensored fun and frivolity.